We'll continue on the topic with a speaker that is highly recognized on the practice of monetizing APIs. He's Derric Gilling, CEO at Moesif. Hello, Derric. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Can't complain. We got a nice sunny day here in San Francisco, even though our winters are usually cold.
Yeah. So let's celebrate that, and for the time we can still celebrate good weather on the planet. And yes, let's learn about best practices when monetizing APIs with you. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and glad to be here. Today we're going to be talking about some different best practices around monetizing APIs. There's a lot of different business models that have come around. API product strategy. That's selling an API directly for revenue. You might have a partner ecosystem where developers is more of a partner rather than a customer. But the topic of this focus is going to be mostly around selling the API directly. A little bit about myself. I'm CEO of Moesif. We're the leading API analytics and monetization platform. I love talking about things around API strategy, analytics, things like developer experience, and also I love IPAs. So if you're ever in San Francisco, feel free to send me an email. Why are we talking about API monetization? The first thing is that selling to developers can be extremely hard. Buying is actually quite different today than it was 30 years ago. If you look at 30 years ago, traditionally sales reps would reach out to the C-suite, maybe do some on-site visits, set up a few database servers, and that's the way that companies would buy technical products. These days, it's much more decentralized than ever before. An individual developer has a lot more control and autonomy over the different tooling they would like to use. The other big piece is that these developers are also skeptical of traditional sales and marketing. They don't want to be told what products they should or should not be using. As soon as a product seems to be pushed onto a developer, it just has a bad taste in their mouth. And in fact, it could push them away from a product that could actually be quite excellent. The other big piece is that there's a lot of different tasks that a developer is working on at any given time. There's always higher priority items, bug fixes, and so on. And the last piece is that developers enjoy building things, right? So sometimes you can run into different organizations where they're walking through a build versus buy discussion. Do they want to actually ensure that their IP stays in-house? Do they have the right customizations that they can roll out? Or should they buy a different product? But the other big challenge is not necessarily just with developers. It's a fact that in order to adopt any type of technical product, you have a lot of different stakeholders that developer needs buy-in from. You have legal review, security review. Does it meet the right compliance requirements for the organization? If you're in a regulated industry like healthcare or financial, there's a very specific set of requirements that a new API or tool must comply with in order for it to be adopted. But you also have things like finance and procurement. That can take time, for them to review the contract, or to make sure that it's within the right systems at the company. And lastly, you have leadership that might be driving different product priorities. And so how do you make sure you're getting alignment between, the security team, the product team, executive team, procurement, and so on? So as you can see, there's a lot of different moving pieces. And so there's this newer model that's been coming around, which is land developers first. Get an individual developer pay a token amount, for your API, whether that's $10 a month, maybe it's $100 a month, but at least they're paying something, and they're also getting value out of it before they're asking their manager for $100,000 for this particular product. This allows you to open up your top of funnel. It's a much larger, I guess that should say more middle of the funnel or top of funnel. I don't know why we say bottoms up there. But I guess a different way to put this is some folks will call this product-led growth. Some folks will call this a bottoms-up SaaS for first, API first. There's a lot of different names for this same approach, which is get developers through the door, using the product, and getting to their aha moment. Also, you're reducing that time to paying. And the reason being is you're actually reducing a lot of friction for that manager to swipe the card. Instead of going through legal and security review, instead it's just a very simple click-through terms of service. Instead of dealing with planning out a POC that might take 30 days or 60 days, you're doing a very simple fast integration, very trial that they can get started with in a matter of maybe 10 or 15 minutes to see that initial hello world. And instead of dealing with procurement and finance and all those other workflows, you just use a manager's credit card, swipe it, start a discretionary spending, and not much is needed there. However, the selling process doesn't end there. In fact, this is where the selling process starts. And what you're doing is you're actually selling through these developers. You're selling to a leadership because they have particular requirements. Maybe it's through single sign-on, or maybe they need direct access or direct export, or to connect this API to another tool that they're already using. And those are things that leadership might care about, even though the developer doesn't. Developer might not necessarily care about, do you integrate with Okta or Salesforce or something like that. Another big thing is increased usage. One of the great things about APIs is they're transactional in nature. And so you can get a developer started off with using an API on a very small budget, but then as soon as they roll it out to production, makes a 10x or 100x increase in volume, which might correspond to a larger increase in spend. Lastly, there could be new use cases that come up, different teams that might need access to this, whether it's data or the workflows, or whatever it is that the API is providing. So in this, we're not selling to the developer. We're leveraging that developer as a champion to how to promote whatever value this API is creating, and then allowing your sales team to get engaged to drive up the ACV and get those enterprise deals. However, each API business is different. Some folks might think about prepaid billing versus postpaid billing. There's different ways to package your pricing strategy, whether it's more of a traditional 3-tier SaaS model that we see versus more of a pay-as-you-go consumption-based billing model. How do you invoice? When do you invoice? And what level of support do you provide, especially when you have this bottoms up or developer first model? And so for the rest of this presentation, we're going to walk through a couple of key areas around billing and pricing and packaging. But the important piece first, before we go through those, is what is sales actually focused on? They're focused on these high ROI opportunities. So these are developers who already saw value by integrating the API. Maybe it's within their workflow. They might not necessarily be generating revenue or having end users using the API, but at least they were able to test it out with Postman or a different tool. And the sales team's responsibility is more about educating and being more consultative, especially when these different scenarios happen, which is additional use cases, maybe their usage is increasing, and that's a good time for sales to get engaged with these customers, because no one wants to have a massive $10,000 bill for the month, without ever talking to a sales and understanding what is the right way to get the most value out of the platform. So first, we're going to talk about billing strategy. When we talk about billing strategy, there's two popular strategies that we see out in the wild. There's what we call prepaid billing, and this is when a customer is purchasing or paying for their quota ahead of time before it's consumed. This is already popularized within traditional enterprise contracts, where you're paying up for a year up front, maybe you're paying for a quarter up front, or whatever it is that you're set up with. Another model is postpaid billing, and we see this a lot within things like ad networks. The cloud vendors have been popularizing this, where you use a product, you don't pay a cent, and then at the end of the month, you get a bill for however many compute hours or ad clicks or whatever it is that you use for the last month, and then you pay the bill. And so there's some benefits and cons for both of these models. On the prepaid side, you're able to generate much higher cash flow because customers are paying up front before they even consume the API. This can be extremely helpful, especially if your API itself is expensive to serve. Maybe there's a lot of third parties that you're depending on in order to fulfill those API transactions. It's also more familiar with traditional enterprise, who is used to paying upfront for these different enterprise contracts and going through procurement maybe once a year or once every couple of years. One of the biggest cons, though, is that friction in onboarding, because now you're asking for money before they saw that much value in the tool itself. And that's where the postpaid billing is super helpful. As a cloud vendor, I can spin up my VM, or my instance or something, and don't worry about how much it's going to cost, and then see what that cost looks like at the end of the month. This also allows me to not have decision paralysis around how much do I need, right? Because I don't know, is it one compute unit or is it 1,000 compute units? This gives me the ability to actually measure that over a period of time. The second piece I want to speak on is packaging strategy. There's a lot of different ways to package your API. But the two common ways is what we call tiered pricing. This is what we see usually within traditional SaaS products, where you have maybe a free plan, a better plan, and then a best plan. On the flip side, we have what we call pay-as-you-go, and that's what we've been seeing. I would say more of a modern approach to selling an API. We're paying literally per transaction, and so that might be 10 cents per 1,000 API calls, or 5 cents per text message sent through the API, or something like that. On the tiered pricing side, one of the great things is it does enforce a minimum spend. This can be helpful if your support costs are a little bit higher than other products. It's also more predictable for the customer to have a particular monthly bill or yearly bill that they have, and it's not going to fluctuate too much, other than maybe if you add some usage components to that tiered pricing. It's also extremely easy to implement. A lot of software products like Chargebee and Stripe such can easily handle tiered pricing. However, one of the biggest downsides is it can actually be too rigid for customers, and it's hard to have automatic expansion, because what happens is you're waiting for that customer to reach a certain threshold or quota before they're ready to move to the next plan. However, because you might package 10 different pricing levers in a single tier, if a developer only exceeds one of those 10 pricing levers, they may not be ready to actually upgrade to the next tier. They just wait till the next billing month, or just feel not required to move over. Whereas with the pay-as-you-go, you actually have a seamless expansion model, right? Someone can get started easily for 10 cents the first month. The next they're paying $53, and then next month after that they're paying $10,053. So you have this natural expansion revenue. It can appear cheaper because that very first month they're paying 10 cents or 50 cents, and this is something we see with stuff like S3 and some of the very transactional based API products like Twilio. But one of the biggest cons is it can upset customers if you don't manage that process well. No one wants to go from $50 a month in 1 month, and then the next month is $10,000 bill, and they have to explain that to the manager. Why did this API suddenly cost $10,000? It can also be extremely complex to implement. You need metering in place. You need a way for you to track the usage of each customer, especially if your meters are more complex than just measuring API calls, which I hope you are thinking about a complex way to meter. For example, you might have a bulk API that allows you to send 10 text messages, but on a single API endpoint that sends only a single text message. You don't want to bill just on number of API calls. You want to bill on the actual value that is created through the API, which might be number of text messages sent, which means now you need a way to meter and measure that. The last piece is invoicing strategy. And in this case, we look at two common paths. Number one is the recurring strategy, which is sending out an invoice at the end of each month, or maybe it's each year. It's on some type of schedule with the customer. This is much easier for the finance team to deal with. They know exactly how much they're going to spend. They know it's much easier to recognize that revenue or recognize that cost, especially when we think about GAAP accounting. It's also more predictable for a customer. You don't have these weird situations where you get 2 invoices 1 month, but the next month you have 0 invoices, and how do you deal with that type of stuff in terms of spend and cash flow? One of the downsides, though, of recurring billing is that you can have bad unit economics, especially for low-cost SaaS. In 1 month, developer can pay just 10 cents. Do you want to actually send an invoice for 10 cents worth? That can actually have much higher burden for your finance team, the customers, customer side, and also just things like transaction cost itself. It can also be a little bit more complex if it's prepaid. On the threshold side, this is what we see within ad networks, where it might be after a certain amount of spend is met. Every, say, $10,000, you build a customer. Or in Twilio's case, it's actually prepaid too. So you purchase maybe $500 worth of credits, and then you burn those down over a period of time. So it doesn't really matter when you purchase those credits. You can, purchase them 3 times in 1 month, and the next month you actually have plenty of credits, so you don't need any more. So one of the pros for this is it can actually reduce the transaction cost because you're allowing the customer to bundle a transaction to a larger amount. And so you might have a minimum spend where you had to purchase at least $50 worth of credits. It can also make prepaid much easier because now you already have those credits in place and you just burn them down. The con is that it can be harder for finance departments. So, a lot of the stuff you see here with invoicing strategy is driven more from the finance team rather than the product and engineering team due to the complexities around threshold-based invoicing. Another thing I want to spend is different value metrics around the API. Going back to what I mentioned with text messages, you could have a couple of different APIs, each with the ability to send a text message or even 100 text messages, and ensuring that the API values that you're choosing is actually aligned to the value the customer receives. Another example of this is, let's say you're selling an email API. If you charge for, and let's say also this API allows customers to create email templates in the platform somehow. Maybe it's something that the API can use. It's like an HTML template or something like that. There's 2 ways you could probably charge this. One is number of templates that the customer stores in the platform, and another way you could charge is number of emails that are sent through the platform. If you choose a number of templates that a customer stored in the platform, that could be a poor choice for value metrics. The reason being is that customer didn't really see any value, even if they stored all these different templates, set everything up, but they never sent a single email to a customer. They didn't really get that much value. On the other hand, even if a customer just creates one single template, but they were able to email maybe 10,000 different customers, or maybe that was emailing 10,000 different leads, they're able to get some value by sending out those emails through the platform. And so thinking about how it's aligned to customer value, and there's different ways to do this. One of the classic examples is transaction volume, which is number of API calls or maybe number of messages. If you're an analytics platform, it might be number of events that you're tracking. Another example of this is revenue or cost share. And so if you're a payment processor or maybe expense processing platform, it might be percentage of that revenue, percentage of the spend. Maybe it's 2.9% or something like that. We probably know a classic example, a classic company that uses the 2.9% as their pricing lever. But we do have some other ones here. Data volume is a good example, which is gigabytes sent, or maybe it's number of minutes processed. Lastly, we have like user centric, which are things like monthly tracked users or monthly unique users. This is actually kind of like a modern version of the per seat or per license pricing we saw with more traditional SaaS tools. Even though roll out a nice usage-based monetization model for your customers, there's still a lot of pitfalls to think about. Number one is that account management is actually very, very hard to deal with when you start scaling out the number of developers or the number of customers. It's one thing to have account management with maybe it's 20 customers or 100 customers. It's a whole different ballgame when you have 10,000 different developers or a million different developers that you have to manage. Each of these developers are going to have different experience levels, different uses. Some of them might have issues around onboarding. They're going to have different changing business needs. They need to add their manager, and they're able to get analytics out of the platform. They're going to have billing surprises, like I mentioned earlier, which is they get that $10,000 bill. How do you manage this when you're dealing with a developer community of thousands or millions of developers? And one of the best ways to do this is through self-service management, providing tooling to the developer, such as how much of their quota have they used? Do they get alerts when they reach certain thresholds or burn down their quotas? How do they add different team members or get analytics around the use of the tool, providing those type of analytics and providing the right ways for them to add seats or change things with their count. Do as much as you can so it's self-service. That way your sales team and support team can focus on the accounts that matter, which are the ones that are looking for those larger enterprise contracts. Another thing we recommend is, trying to avoid these billing surprises. This is a thing that comes up over and over when you move towards a usage-based billing model, where someone does get that $10,000 bill. Easy way to do that is just over communicate as much as possible. Let developers know, when there's an increase in usage, allow them to configure different thresholds so that, when they reach, maybe it's $1,000 a month, they can get their own email so they can take action, whether that's, readjusting their plan, whether that's adjusting how they're using the product. On the flip side, your CSM team should also be tracking these accounts. And that's a key component of product-led growth. What you're looking for and what sales team is engaging when they engage with customers is when there's these different indicators, such as, it's within your ICP, your ideal customer profile, but also, they have increasing usage of the API. Maybe it increased by 200x in the last, couple of weeks or something like that. And that's a good indicator for sales to say, hey, increasing your use of the API, let's hop on a call, get you on a plan that makes more sense for your needs, and understand how it can help you get more value out of the platform. Another thing we recommend is, how do you reduce friction itself? We talked about using the manager's credit card, but one of the downsides of that is, you do have employee attrition. That credit card could get canceled. It might have low limits on it. And one thing you can leverage is, things like AWS Marketplace, Azure Marketplace, Sales. They all have different ways for you to use, their billing platform. And so if an Amazon customer, a Salesforce customer already has a committed spend with Amazon, you can actually just be another part of that contract without having a separate negotiated contract with your business. When you start growing your developer community, you're not going to be able to talk to every single developer out there. And that's one of the tricky things about these developer first or bottoms up business models, is how you actually systematically create understanding of how well your product is doing. And one way to do this is creating these activation and conversion funnels. A classic example for an API business is what I'm showing here, which is, you visit a page, if you go into a doc page, blog article, something like that, they sign up for the platform, they start looking at, onboarding, getting started. Maybe you present some API keys or something like that for them to get, and then they make their first hello world. The first hello world is a very, very important point in this activation funnel, in that they spent enough time to either implement the SDK, maybe they made some API calls through Postman, but they at least invested time and also proved that they are a developer and technical enough to start using your APIs. Doesn't necessarily mean they got value out of the platform yet. Because if you just made a few API calls through Postman, that is not like a fully working app that's deployed where end users is using or somehow generating revenue. And that's that last step there, which is going from hello world, where you just made a few API calls through Postman, to having a fully deployed solution that is creates value for the organization. And that might take some time. It could be dependent on outside factors like the security review stuff that we talked about earlier. And so for you as an API provider or someone that's selling an API, it's really important to keep feeding content and enablement material for the developers and for the other folks that might be involved with rolling that out, whether that is, you're compliant or different articles around your security practices. What might be missing here could also mean creating tooling for things like acceptance testing. Segment did a phenomenal job where, if you're using the Segment APIs, they actually had a set of tools they could also run to validate that you're integrated with the APIs correctly.
Hi, Derek. We're on time, so if you can wrap up, please.
Sure. Yeah. Lastly, what to measure: conversion rate, and then time to reach the next step. Quite a few different developer personas, so helpful to measure that, so you can slice and dice that activation funnel between title, role, size of company, and so on. An example of this, and now we can actually generate a funnel where we see that Reddit ads actually converts at a higher rate than some of these other activation channels or marketing channels that we have. And we can see here that conversion rate is around 42%, and it takes around 7 hours to convert. So our key takeaway is create a great self-service onboarding. Make sure you over communicate with developers. No one wants to be surprised, and so if you send out those emails, you stay in touch with them, you can have a really good and monetizable API. Cool.
Yeah, thank you very much, Derek. We're really out of time. I would have loved to ask many questions, but for next time we will for sure ask all these questions, especially when it's not transactional APIs. When there are business models based on the total number of end users or tokens or whatever, not directly infrastructure or transactional, like like pay as you go or stuff. I would love to have asked these questions, but let's keep it for a next event.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much.